The morning mist hung heavy over the small town of Cedar Falls, Pennsylvania, as 72-year-old Marine veteran Thomas Mitchell stepped onto his back porch, coffee mug in hand. The October air carried the scent of dying leaves and distant wood smoke, but something felt different today. His German shepherd, Rex, was already at the far end of the yard, pawing frantically at the ground near the old oak tree. "Rex, what's got into you, boy?" Thomas called out, his weathered voice cutting through the silence. The dog had been acting strange for 3 days now, always returning to that same spot, digging with an urgency that seemed almost human. Thomas walked across the dew-soaked grass, his arthritic knees protesting with each step. 47 years had passed since he'd returned from Vietnam, but his body still carried the weight of those jungle months. As he approached, Rex looked up with intelligent brown eyes, dirt caked on his snout, tail wagging with excitement. All right, let me see what's so important," Thomas muttered, kneeling beside the hole Rex had excavated. The earth was soft from recent rains, and about 2 feet down, something metallic caught the morning light. Thomas's heart skipped. Even corroded and covered in decades of soil, he recognized the distinctive shape immediately. It was a military helmet, but not the modern Kevlar he'd worn in Southeast Asia. This was older, much older. The steel was pitted with rust, but the basic structure remained intact. With trembling hands, he carefully lifted the helmet from its earthen grave. It was heavier than he expected, and as he turned it over, his breath caught in his throat. There was something inside, wrapped in what appeared to be oiled cloth that had somehow survived the decades underground. "A good lord," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Rex whined softly, sensing his master's sudden tension. Thomas carried the helmet inside, his mind racing. In his kitchen, under the bright fluorescent light, he could see more details. The helmet bore markings he didn't immediately recognize, but the style suggested World War II era. His grandfather had served in the Pacific Theater, but this property had been in the Mitchell family for over a century. How had a military helmet ended up buried in his backyard? The wrapped object inside rattled slightly as he moved the helmet. Thomas hesitated. Should he call someone? The police, a museum? But curiosity, that same drive that had kept him alive in the jungles of Vietnam, won out. Carefully, he unwrapped the oiled cloth. Inside was a small metal container about the size of a cigarette pack, sealed tight. And beneath that, a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age but remarkably preserved. Thomas unfolded the paper with the delicacy of a surgeon. The handwriting was neat, precise, written in fading blue ink. As he read the first line, his hands began to shake. "May, if you're reading this, then I didn't make it home. My name is Lieutenant James Harrison, 101st Airborne Division. And I need someone to know the truth about what happened at Normandy." The letter was dated June 5th, 1944, the day before D-Day. Thomas sank into his kitchen chair, the weight of history suddenly pressing down on him. He'd heard stories about soldiers leaving messages, final letters to loved ones, but finding one in his own backyard felt surreal, almost impossible. He continued reading, his eyes straining to make out the faded words. Lieutenant Harrison wrote about his unit, about the fear and anticipation before the invasion. But then the tone shifted, becoming urgent, almost frantic. There's something the brass doesn't want getting out. Something about our mission that goes beyond what they've told us. We're not just taking the beach. We're looking for something specific, something the Germans have been hiding. Captain Morrison showed us photographs, documents in German that none of us could read, but the fear in his eyes was unmistakable. Thomas paused, reaching for his reading glasses. This wasn't just a soldier's final letter. This was something else entirely. They told us about a bunker deeper than the coastal defenses, where the Germans have been conducting experiments, not on weapons, but on people. American POWs, who were reported as missing in action. Morrison said we had 48 hours to find them before the evidence disappeared forever. The letter went on to describe a secret mission within the larger D-Day operation. A small unit tasked with infiltrating German research facilities while the main force drew attention at the beaches. Harrison wrote about his squad members, about their families back home, about the weight of carrying such a terrible secret. But it was the final paragraph that made Thomas's blood run cold. If something happens to me, if I don't make it back, someone needs to know that we found them. The Americans the Germans took, what they did to them. God help us all. The evidence is in the container with this letter. Photographs, documents, proof of what happened. Captain Morrison made me promise to hide this if things went wrong. He said there were people back home, people in high places, who knew about the experiments and did nothing. People who would kill to keep this quiet. Thomas set the letter down, his hands shaking. He looked at the small metal container, still sealed after all these years. Part of him wanted to put everything back, to rebury the helmet and pretend Rex had never found it. But another part, the Marine in him, knew he couldn't walk away from this. He opened the container with a small screwdriver from his kitchen drawer. Inside were photographs, black and white images that made his stomach turn, documents in German with official stamps and signatures, and a list of names. American servicemen who had been reported missing in action but were clearly alive in these photographs, subjected to medical procedures that violated every rule of war. Thomas recognized some of the names from the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Wall he'd visited in Washington. Men who were supposed to have died in combat, not in some underground laboratory. His phone rang, startling him from his thoughts. The caller ID showed his daughter Sarah's number. "Now, Dad, I was just calling to check on you. How are you feeling today?" Poor. Thomas looked at the evidence spread across his kitchen table, the weight of 78-year-old secrets pressing down on him. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just fine." But he wasn't fine. Nothing would be fine again, because now he knew something that powerful people had killed to keep secret, something that could rewrite the history books and destroy reputations that had been carefully built over decades. As he hung up the phone, Thomas noticed a car he didn't recognize parked across the street. A black sedan with tinted windows that hadn't been there an hour ago. Rex growled low in his throat, staring out the front window. Thomas gathered the documents and photographs, his military training kicking in. If Lieutenant Harrison was right, if there really were people who would kill to keep this quiet, then he was already in danger. The question was, what was he going to do about it? He thought about his grandfather, who had served in the Pacific and never talked about the war. He thought about his own service in Vietnam, about the things he'd seen that still haunted his dreams. And he thought about the young men in those photographs, Americans who had trusted their government to bring them home. Thomas made his decision. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in years. "Professor Williams, this is Tom Mitchell. I know it's been a long time, but I need your help. I've found something that's going to change everything we thought we knew about World War II. As he waited for his old friend to answer, Thomas watched the black sedan through his window. The car hadn't moved, but he could see the silhouette of someone inside, watching his house. The game had already begun, and Thomas Mitchell, a 72-year-old Marine veteran with arthritis and a loyal dog, was about to become the most dangerous man in America. Professor David Williams arrived at Thomas's house 3 hours later, his silver hair disheveled and his usually calm demeanor replaced by barely contained excitement. As a military historian at Penn State University, he'd spent decades studying World War II, but nothing had prepared him for what Thomas showed him. "My God, Tom," David whispered, examining the photographs through a magnifying glass. "These are authentic. The paper, the photographic techniques, even the German documentation style. This is real." Thomas poured his old friend another cup of coffee, his eyes never leaving the front window. The black sedan had been replaced by a different car, a grey SUV, but the surveillance was obvious to anyone with military training. "Well, the question is, what do we do with it?" Thomas asked. Harrison's letter suggests there were people in the American government who knew about these experiments. People who might still be alive or whose families are still in positions of power. David set down the magnifying glass and looked at his friend seriously. Tom, do you understand what you've stumbled onto? This isn't just about World War II history. This is about war crimes, cover-ups, and conspiracy at the highest levels of government. If this gets out, it changes everything, Thomas finished. But I know, but those men in the photographs, they deserve justice. Even if it's 78 years too late. Rex suddenly barked, a sharp warning sound that made both men freeze. Through the front window, they could see two men in dark suits walking up the front path. They moved with the confident stride of federal agents, but something about their approach set off every alarm bell in Thomas's military-trained mind. "A back door," Thomas whispered urgently. "Take the documents and go out the back. My truck is in the alley behind the house." "What about you?" David asked, already gathering the evidence. "I'll handle this. If something happens to me, you know what to do." David hesitated for a moment, then nodded. He'd known Thomas long enough to trust his instincts. As the historian slipped out the back door with the documents, Thomas straightened his shoulders and walked to the front door. The two men were younger than he'd expected, probably in their 30s, with the kind of physical fitness that suggested military or intelligence backgrounds. The taller one flashed a badge too quickly for Thomas to read properly. "Mr. Mitchell, Agent Johnson, Department of Homeland Security. We'd like to ask you a few questions about some items that may have been discovered on your property." Thomas kept his expression neutral, falling back on decades of military discipline. "I'm not sure what you're talking about, gentlemen." The shorter agent, who hadn't introduced himself, stepped forward slightly. "Oh, sir, we have reason to believe you may have found some historical artifacts that could pose a national security risk. We're here to help you handle this situation properly." "National security risk?" Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Are we talking about the rusty helmet my dog dug up?" "Because I was planning to take it to the local VFW. See if anyone knew who it belonged to." The agents exchanged a quick glance, and Thomas caught the subtle hand signal the taller one made. These weren't federal agents. Real feds would have shown proper identification, would have followed protocol. These men were something else entirely. "Mr. Mitchell," the shorter agent said, his voice taking on a harder edge, "I think you know exactly what we're talking about. We can do this the easy way or the hard way, but those documents need to come with us." Thomas smiled, the same cold smile he'd worn in the jungles of Vietnam when Charlie thought they had him cornered. "Documents? What documents?" The taller agent's hand moved toward his jacket, but Thomas was faster than his 72 years suggested. His own hand found the Colt .45 he'd carried since Vietnam, now kept in a holster behind his back. "But gentlemen, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm a United States Marine, and I don't take kindly to threats on my own property. Now, unless you have a warrant signed by a federal judge, I suggest you get off my land." The standoff lasted only seconds, but it felt like hours. Finally, the shorter agent stepped back, his hands visible. "This isn't over, Mr. Mitchell. What you've found belongs to the government. We'll be back." "I'll be here," Thomas replied evenly, watching as the two men retreated to their grey SUV. As soon as they were gone, Thomas called David's cell phone. "They're gone, but they'll be back." "We need to move fast." "I'm already at the university," David replied. "Tom, I've been making some calls. A colleague of mine at the National Archives might be able to help us authenticate these documents officially. But we need to be careful about who we trust." Thomas looked around his kitchen, at the hole in his backyard, where Rex had made the discovery that would change everything. "David, I've been thinking about Harrison's letter. He mentioned Captain Morrison, said he was the one who knew about the cover-up. If Morrison survived the war, I'm already on it," David interrupted. "There were 3 Captain Morrisons who served with the 101st Airborne. One died at Normandy, one died in Korea, but the third, Thomas Morrison lived until 1987. He became a federal judge after the war. The implications hit Thomas like a physical blow. A federal judge with knowledge of war crimes, with the power to influence investigations and cover-ups for decades after the war ended. His son, Thomas said quietly. A Judge Morrison's son? What happened to him? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Tom, you're not going to like this. Thomas Morrison Jr. He's currently the deputy director of the CIA. Thomas sank into his kitchen chair, the full scope of what they were dealing with finally becoming clear. This wasn't just about historical documents or war crimes from World War II. This was about a conspiracy that had been maintained for nearly 8 decades, protected by people in the highest levels of American government. We can't trust anyone in the federal government, Thomas said. But if Morrison's son is involved, if his father really was part of the cover-up, then they have people everywhere. What do you want to do? David asked. Thomas looked out his window at the peaceful street where he'd lived for 40 years, at the neighbors who waved to him every morning, at the life he'd built after surviving Vietnam. All of that was about to change. We go public, he said finally. But we do it smart. Multiple sources, multiple copies of the evidence, and we make sure the story gets out before they can stop us. As he spoke, Rex began barking again, but this time it wasn't a warning bark. It was the excited bark the dog made when he recognized someone. Thomas looked out the window and saw his daughter, Sarah's car, pulling into the driveway. His blood ran cold. Sarah never visited on weekdays. She was a nurse at the county hospital, always working during the day. Unless... Thomas grabbed his gun and moved to the front door, his mind racing. If they had gotten to Sarah, if they were using his own daughter to get to him, then this had just become personal in a way that would end badly for everyone involved. But when Sarah got out of her car, she was alone, and her expression was one of concern, not fear. She hurried up the front steps, her nurse's training evident in the way she immediately assessed his condition. Dad, are you okay? I'd got a call at work, someone saying you'd been in an accident. When I called your house and you didn't answer, Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. Sarah, I never left the house today. And I answered when you called this morning. The realization hit them both at the same time. Someone had called Sarah, lied to her, tried to get her to come to the house. But why? The answer came in the form of a black van that suddenly appeared at the end of the street, moving too fast for the residential neighborhood. Thomas grabbed Sarah's arm and pulled her inside, locking the door behind them. And Dad, what's going on? You're scaring me. Thomas looked at his daughter, the nurse who had dedicated her life to helping people, who had never hurt anyone in her life. She didn't deserve to be dragged into this, but it was too late for that now. Sarah, I need you to listen to me very carefully. We're in danger, and I need you to do exactly what I say. Hey, if you're finding this story as gripping as we are, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss what happens next. And drop a comment below. Do you think Thomas should go public with the evidence, or is he putting his family in too much danger? Your engagement helps us bring you more incredible stories like this one. Also, smash that like button to help our channel grow. The black van had stopped 3 houses down, and Thomas could see armed figures moving in the shadows. These weren't federal agents or even private security. These were military contractors, the kind of people who made problems disappear permanently. Sarah, we need to leave, now. But as they moved toward the back door, Thomas heard the sound that every combat veteran dreads, the distinctive click of automatic weapons being readied for action. They were surrounded. Thomas's mind raced through his options. The house had good sight lines, solid construction, and he knew every inch of it. But he was one man with a handgun against what appeared to be a full tactical team. The odds were not in his favor. Dad, please tell me what's happening, Sarah whispered, her voice tight with fear. I found something, sweetheart. Something that some very powerful people don't want the world to know about. And now they're here to make sure it stays buried. The phone rang, cutting through the tension like a knife. Thomas looked at the caller ID, unknown number. He answered on the third ring. Mitchell. Mr. Mitchell, this is Colonel James Patterson, United States Army Intelligence. I know this is going to be hard to believe, but I'm here to help you. Thomas almost laughed. Let me guess, you're with the guys surrounding my house. No, sir. I'm the guy who's been tracking the people surrounding your house for the past 6 months. What you found in your backyard, it's not the first evidence of this conspiracy to surface, but it might be the most important. Through the front window, Thomas could see movement in the shadows. The tactical team was getting into position, but they seemed to be waiting for something. Colonel, assuming you're telling the truth, what exactly are you proposing? There's a drainage tunnel that runs under your property. Connects to the storm system that empties into Cedar Creek. Your dog Rex found it last month when he was digging, but you probably thought he was just chasing rabbits. Thomas frowned. Rex had been digging in multiple spots around the yard, not just where he'd found the helmet. How do you know about my dog? Because I've been watching your house, protecting you. Ever since our intelligence network detected unusual activity around properties connected to World War II veterans. Mr. Mitchell, you're not the only one who's found evidence, but you might be the only one who's still alive. The words hit Thomas like a physical blow. What do you mean? In the past year, 7 World War II veterans or their families have died under suspicious circumstances, all within weeks of discovering historical artifacts or documents related to classified wartime operations. Heart attacks, car accidents, home invasions gone wrong. But we know better. Sarah grabbed Thomas's arm, her eyes wide with terror. Dad, what have you gotten us into? Before Thomas could answer, the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a second later, but the message was clear. Whoever was outside had control of the situation. Colonel Patterson, Thomas said into the phone. If you're really here to help, now would be a good time. Look out your back window. Toward the creek. Thomas moved carefully to the rear of the house, Sarah close behind him. In the distance, barely visible in the moonlight, he could see figures moving through the trees. But these figures were different, moving with military precision, but approaching the house from the opposite direction of the tactical team. Mr. Mitchell, in 30 seconds, you're going to hear gunfire. When you do, take your daughter and head for the basement. There's a section of the foundation wall that's been weakened behind your water heater. Push hard and it will give way. The tunnel is on the other side. How do you know about my basement? Because, sir, your house was built on land that was once part of a World War II training facility. The tunnels were part of the original construction, used for escape and evasion training. Most people don't know they exist. The gunfire started exactly when Patterson had predicted. Not the sharp crack of handguns, but the deeper, more sustained sound of military-grade weapons. Thomas grabbed Sarah and headed for the basement stairs. Dad, I don't understand any of this. I know, sweetheart. But right now, we need to trust the Colonel. In the basement, Thomas found the section of wall Patterson had described. It looked solid, but when he put his shoulder against it, the concrete blocks shifted. Behind them was indeed a tunnel, narrow but passable, with emergency lighting that flickered on as they entered. To Mr. Mitchell, are you in the tunnel? Patterson's voice came through the phone, slightly distorted by the underground location. And we're here. Good. Follow the tunnel for about 200 yards. It will bring you up near the creek, where my team is waiting. But, sir, before you leave, there's something you need to know. Thomas paused, Sarah beside him in the narrow tunnel. What? Trey, the evidence you found, it's not just about World War II. It's about a conspiracy that's been ongoing for nearly 80 years. The same people who covered up those experiments have been involved in illegal operations ever since. Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. What you found is the key to exposing all of it. The implications were staggering. Thomas thought about his own service in Vietnam, about the things that had never made sense, The orders that had seemed to come from nowhere, the operations that had been classified at levels he'd never understood. And Colonel, how do I know you're not just another part of the conspiracy? There was a pause. Then Patterson's voice came back, quieter, more personal. Because, sir, my grandfather was Lieutenant James Harrison, 101st Airborne Division. The man who wrote that letter you found. Thomas stopped walking, the revelation hitting him like a thunderbolt. Your grandfather. He didn't die at Normandy, Mr. Mitchell. He survived the war, but he spent the rest of his life trying to expose what he'd seen. They destroyed his military records, discredited him, made him look like a shell-shocked veteran with delusions. He died in 1987, the same year Judge Morrison died, still trying to get someone to listen to his story. Sarah looked at her father with confusion and growing fear. Dad, please, what is he talking about? Thomas put his arm around his daughter, trying to process everything he'd learned. Sarah, sometimes good people have to do dangerous things to stop evil from continuing. Your grandfather understood that when he fought in Vietnam, and now it's my turn. They reached the end of the tunnel, where a metal ladder led up to a concealed exit near the creek. As they climbed, Thomas could hear the sound of helicopters in the distance, growing closer. Colonel Patterson, please tell me those are your helicopters. Negative, sir. We need to move fast. My extraction team is waiting, but we have maybe 5 minutes before this area is crawling with hostiles. Thomas emerged from the tunnel to find himself face to face with a man in his 40s, wearing military fatigues but no insignia. The resemblance to the young soldier in Lieutenant Harrison's photograph was unmistakable. Mr. Mitchell, I'm Colonel Patterson. We need to get you and your daughter to safety. And then we need to talk about how we're going to expose this conspiracy once and for all. As they moved through the trees toward a waiting vehicle, Thomas looked back at his house. Flames were beginning to show through the windows, and he could see the tactical team retreating to their vehicles. Everything he'd built over 40 years was being destroyed to protect a secret that was older than his daughter. But in his jacket pocket, he still had the photographs and documents that David Williams had copied before escaping. The evidence that could finally bring justice to the men who had died in those German experiments and expose the conspiracy that had protected their killers for nearly 8 decades. The real fight was just beginning, and Thomas Mitchell, a 72-year-old Marine veteran with a loyal dog and a terrible secret, was about to become the most wanted man in America. But he was also about to become the most dangerous because he had something that powerful people had killed to keep hidden: the truth. As they reached the extraction vehicle, Rex came bounding out of the woods, having somehow escaped the chaos at the house. The German shepherd jumped into the back of the military truck, tail wagging as if this was all just another adventure. Good boy, Thomas whispered, scratching behind the dog's ears. You started all this, didn't you? Colonel Patterson started the engine, and they pulled away from Cedar Falls, leaving behind the burning house and the life Thomas had known. But ahead of them lay something more important than comfort or safety, the chance to finally tell the truth about what had happened to those American soldiers in 1944, and to stop the people who had been covering it up ever since. The helicopter sounds were getting closer, but Thomas Mitchell was no longer afraid. He was a United States Marine, and he had a mission to complete. The same mission that Lieutenant James Harrison had started 78 years ago on the beaches of Normandy. The truth was finally going to come out, no matter what it cost. That's the end of our first block. This story has taken us from a simple discovery in a backyard to a conspiracy that spans nearly 8 decades. We've seen Thomas Mitchell transform from a quiet veteran to a man on the run, carrying evidence that could rewrite history books and expose corruption at the highest levels of government. If you're as captivated by this story as we are, make sure you're subscribed to our channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the explosive conclusion. Comment below with your theories about what Thomas and Colonel Patterson will do next, And don't forget to smash that like button to help our channel reach more people who love incredible true stories like this one. Your support means everything to us. Please confirm with OK or continue, and I'll deliver the second block with the remaining 2 chapters that will reveal the shocking truth behind the conspiracy and Thomas's ultimate decision about how to expose it to the world. The safe house was a nondescript cabin 30 miles outside of Cedar Falls, hidden among the Pennsylvania hills where the autumn leaves created a natural camouflage. Thomas sat at a wooden table, the documents spread before him under the harsh light of a camping lantern, while Sarah slept fitfully on a cot in the corner. Rex lay at Thomas's feet, alert despite the exhaustion of their escape. Colonel Patterson paced the small room, his phone pressed to his ear as he coordinated with his team. When he finally hung up, his expression was grim. Mr. Mitchell, we have a problem. The story is already being spun. Local news is reporting that your house caught fire due to an electrical malfunction, and that you and your daughter died in the blaze. Your bodies were supposedly recovered, too badly burned for identification. Thomas looked up from the documents, his jaw tight. They're declaring us dead. It's a standard play. If you're officially dead, then anything you might say publicly can be dismissed as the ravings of someone with a grudge, assuming you surface at all. They're betting you'll stay hidden to protect your daughter. Sarah stirred on the cot, awakened by their voices.
No, Dad. What's happening now?
Thomas went to his daughter, helping her sit up. Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. These people, they're going to keep coming after us as long as we have this evidence. The only way to stop them is to make the truth public, but that means putting ourselves at risk. Sarah looked at the documents on the table, then at Colonel Patterson, then back at her father. Dad, I've been a nurse for 15 years. I've seen what happens when people in power abuse that power, when they hurt innocent people and think they can get away with it. If you have evidence that can stop that, then we have to use it. Patterson nodded approvingly. Mom, your father raised a brave daughter, but you need to understand what we're up against. The conspiracy Lieutenant Harrison uncovered in 1944 didn't end with World War II. It evolved. Became more sophisticated, more deeply embedded in the government. He pulled out a laptop and opened a series of files. After the war, many of the Nazi scientists who conducted those experiments were brought to the United States under Operation Paperclip. Officially, they were supposed to help us develop rocket technology and other defensive capabilities. But some of them continued their human experimentation programs. Now with American funding and American subjects, Thomas studied the screen, his military training helping him process the classified documents Patterson was showing them. These are CIA files, correct? MK Ultra, Project Bluebird, dozens of other programs that used American citizens as test subjects without their knowledge or consent. And the same families that covered up the World War II experiments were involved in authorizing and protecting these programs. Sarah gasped as she saw photographs of test subjects, many of them veterans who had volunteered for what they thought were legitimate medical studies. This is monstrous. How many people knew about this? Oh, more than you'd think, fewer than you'd hope, Patterson replied. But the key players, the ones who made the decisions and covered up the evidence, they're still alive. Some of them are still in positions of power. Thomas's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. We have Professor Williams. If you want to see your friend alive, bring the documents to the coordinates we're sending. You have 2 hours. The blood drained from Thomas's face. Do they have David? Patterson looked at the message and cursed under his breath. It's a trap, obviously. But they're counting on your loyalty to your friend. Then they're counting correctly, Thomas said, standing up. David risked his life to help me. I'm not leaving him to die. Dad, no, Sarah protested. If you go, they'll kill all of you. Thomas looked at his daughter, then at Colonel Patterson. Colonel, how many copies of this evidence exist? But your friend Williams made digital copies before he was taken. I have copies, And there are other sources, other evidence that's been gathered over the years. The question is whether we can get it all released simultaneously before they can suppress it. Thomas made his decision. Then we do both. We save David, and we release everything. Patterson studied the older man's face, seeing the same determination that had carried him through Vietnam. What do you have in mind? They want me to bring the documents to them. So I will, but not the real ones. We make copies, doctored copies that look authentic but contain false information. While they're busy trying to verify what I've given them, we release the real evidence to every major news outlet simultaneously. That's assuming they don't just kill you on sight, Sarah pointed out. Thomas smiled grimly. Sweetheart, I didn't survive Vietnam by being careless, and I have something they want more than my death, the location of Lieutenant Harrison's original hiding place. Patterson frowned. What do you mean? Idrisa, the helmet Rex found. It wasn't the only thing buried in my yard. Harrison's letter mentioned other evidence, other locations. I think my property was just one of several drop points he established before D-Day. If I'm right, there's more evidence out there, evidence they haven't found yet. Thomas pulled out a hand-drawn map that had been tucked behind one of the photographs. This was in the container with the documents. It shows locations throughout Pennsylvania, places where Harrison and his team hid evidence before shipping out to Europe. The implications were staggering. If Harrison had created multiple caches of evidence, then the conspiracy was even more vulnerable than they'd realized. Colonel, how long would it take your team to check these locations? Patterson studied the map. With enough manpower, maybe 6 hours to hit all of them. But we'd need a distraction, something to keep the opposition busy while we're digging. You'll have your distraction, Thomas said. Ubin, I'm going to meet with them, but not where they expect. I'm going to bring them to the original site, to my property. While they're focused on me, your team can check the other locations. Sarah grabbed her father's arm. Dad, that's suicide. Your house burned down, remember? There's nothing left there. Exactly. Which means they won't expect me to go back. And the tunnels Colonel Patterson mentioned, they connect to more than just my basement. If Harrison used my property as a base of operations, then there might be more evidence underground that survived the fire. Patterson was already on his phone, coordinating with his team. When he hung up, he looked at Thomas with new respect. Sir, that's either brilliant or insane. In my experience, the two aren't mutually exclusive. The plan came together quickly. Patterson's team would split up, hitting the locations on Harrison's map, while Thomas returned to his burned-out property to meet with David's captors. Sarah would stay at the safe house with a protection detail, monitoring news feeds and coordinating the release of evidence to media outlets. As they prepared to leave, Thomas pulled his daughter aside. Sarah, if something happens to me, nothing's going to happen to you, she interrupted. You're the toughest man I know. Maybe, but if it does, I need you to promise me something. Don't let them bury this. Don't let those men who died in those experiments be forgotten again. Sarah hugged her father tightly. I promise, Dad, but you better come back to me. Thomas and Patterson drove through the night, arriving at the ruins of Thomas's house just as dawn was breaking. The structure was a total loss, but the foundation remained, and the entrance to the tunnel system was still accessible. Mr. Mitchell, Patterson said as they surveyed the damage, are you sure about this? Thomas looked at the place where he'd lived for 40 years, where he'd raised his daughter, where Rex had made the discovery that changed everything. Colonel, I've been running from fights my whole life. Vietnam, the nightmares, the guilt over things I couldn't control. But this fight, this one matters. Those men in Harrison's photographs, they trusted their government to protect them. Instead, they were betrayed and murdered. If I don't stand up for them now, who will? Patterson nodded, understanding the weight of duty that drove men like Thomas Mitchell. Sir, my grandfather would be proud. They entered the tunnel system through the basement ruins, following passages that Harrison and his team had used for training 8 decades earlier. The tunnels were more extensive than Thomas had realized, connecting not just to his property, but to several others in the area. In the chamber beneath what had once been his backyard, they found what they were looking for, another cache of documents, these ones sealed in waterproof containers and hidden behind a false wall. Harrison had been thorough, creating multiple backup sites in case his primary evidence was discovered. "My God," Patterson whispered as he examined the new documents. "These aren't just about the experiments. They're about the cover-up, the people who authorized it, the money that changed hands. This is enough to bring down half the intelligence establishment." Thomas's phone buzzed with another message. "Time's up. Where are you?" He responded quickly, "At the original site. Come alone and bring Professor Williams." Within minutes, they could hear vehicles approaching above ground. Thomas and Patterson took positions in the tunnel, watching through concealed observation points as 3 black SUVs arrived at the burned-out house. The man who got out of the lead vehicle was older than Thomas had expected, probably in his 70s, moving with the careful precision of someone accustomed to power. Behind him came 2 younger men, clearly security, and between them, Professor David Williams, alive but obviously roughed up. "Mr. Mitchell," the older man called out, his voice carrying easily across the ruins. "Oh, do I know you're here? My name is Thomas Morrison, Jr., and I think it's time we had a conversation." Thomas felt his blood run cold. Morrison, Jr., the deputy director of the CIA, the son of the man who had covered up the original experiments. The conspiracy had come full circle. "I'm here, Morrison," Thomas called back, emerging from the tunnel entrance with his hands visible but not raised. "And let Professor Williams go and we can talk." Morrison smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I'm afraid it's not that simple, Mr. Mitchell. You see, you've stumbled onto something that goes far beyond your understanding. Those documents you found, they're not just historical artifacts. They're active intelligence that could compromise ongoing operations. Ongoing operations." Thomas stepped closer, his military bearing evident despite his age. "You mean ongoing cover-ups of war crimes?" "I mean ongoing protection of national security interests," Morrison replied smoothly. "Mr. Mitchell, you're a veteran. You understand that sometimes difficult decisions have to be made for the greater good. I understand that sometimes people in power abuse that power and think they can get away with it because they wrap themselves in the flag." Morrison's expression hardened. "Those experiments you found evidence of, they led to medical breakthroughs that have saved thousands of lives. The intelligence techniques developed from that research helped us win the Cold War. Sometimes sacrifice is necessary for progress." Thomas felt rage building in his chest. The same rage he'd felt in Vietnam, when he'd seen innocent people suffer for the ambitions of politicians who would never face the consequences of their decisions. "Tell that to the families of the men who were murdered in those experiments. Tell that to the veterans who volunteered for medical studies and ended up as test subjects for mind-control drugs. Mr. Mitchell, you're thinking like a soldier, not a strategist. Individual lives matter less than the survival of the nation." "No," Thomas said firmly. "Individual lives are exactly what the nation is supposed to protect. That's what we swore an oath to defend." Morrison gestured to his security team, and they began to move forward. But before they could reach Thomas, gunfire erupted from multiple directions. Patterson's team had arrived, taking positions around the property and engaging Morrison's men. In the chaos, Thomas dove for cover behind the ruins of his front porch, while Morrison and his remaining security retreated to their vehicles. Professor Williams, forgotten in the confusion, crawled toward Thomas's position. "Tom," David gasped as he reached safety. "They killed the archivist who was helping us authenticate the documents. Shot him in his office and made it look like a robbery." Thomas helped his friend to better cover as bullets flew overhead. "David, did you get the copies uploaded?" "Yes, to multiple servers, multiple news outlets. But Morrison's people have been trying to suppress them, claiming they're classified intelligence that could harm national security." The firefight continued for several minutes. But Morrison's team was outnumbered and outgunned. Eventually, the shooting stopped, and Patterson's voice came over a radio. "Mr. Mitchell, we have the area secured. Morrison and 2 of his men escaped, but we captured the others." Thomas emerged from cover, helping Professor Williams to his feet. The older historian was shaken but uninjured, and his eyes were bright with the excitement of a man who had just witnessed history being made. Tom, the evidence we found, it's going to change everything." But Morrison was right about one thing. They're going to try to suppress it. Claim it's a threat to national security. Thomas looked at the ruins of his house, at the place where Rex had made the discovery that started it all. His dog was somewhere safe with Sarah, and soon this would all be over. But the fight for the truth was just beginning. "Then we make sure the truth gets out before they can stop it," Thomas said. "Colonel Patterson, what's the status on the other sites?" De Patterson approached, his tactical gear dusty, but his expression triumphant. "Sir, we hit all 7 locations on Harrison's map. We found evidence at 5 of them, including documents that prove the conspiracy continued well into the 1990s. We have names, dates, financial records, everything we need to expose the entire network." Thomas felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. Lieutenant James Harrison's mission, begun on the beaches of Normandy 78 years ago, was finally going to be completed. And Colonel, get all of that evidence to every major news outlet, every congressional oversight committee, every international human rights organization. Make sure it's released simultaneously so they can't suppress it. Already in progress, sir. But there's something else you need to know. Morrison didn't escape. He's holed up in a federal building in Washington, claiming executive privilege and national security exemptions. He's trying to get a federal judge to issue an injunction against the release of the evidence. Thomas smiled grimly. "Then we better make sure the evidence gets out before any judge can stop it." As they spoke, Thomas's phone rang. The caller ID showed Sarah's number. "Dad, are you okay?" "I've been watching the news feeds, and the story is starting to break. Major outlets are picking it up, but some are being pressured to hold off." "I'm fine, sweetheart. Is the evidence package ready for release?" "Everything's uploaded and ready to go. We just need your authorization." Thomas looked around at the ruins of his old life, at the friends who had risked everything to help him. At the evidence that would finally bring justice to men who had been dead for decades. He thought about Lieutenant Harrison, about the young soldiers who had trusted their government and been betrayed, about all the veterans who had suffered in silence because they thought no one would believe them. "Oh, Sarah, release everything, all of it. Let the world see what was done in their name." Within hours, the story was everywhere. Major newspapers, television networks, online platforms, all carrying the evidence that Thomas Mitchell and his team had uncovered. The photographs of American POWs being subjected to medical experiments. The documents proving government knowledge and cover-up. The financial records showing how the conspiracy had been funded and maintained for decades. Morrison's attempts to suppress the story failed as more and more outlets picked it up. Congressional leaders called for immediate investigations. International human rights organizations demanded accountability. The families of veterans who had died under suspicious circumstances began coming forward with their own stories. Thomas sat in the safe house, watching the news coverage with Sarah and Rex. His house was gone, his quiet retirement was over, and powerful people wanted him dead. But for the first time in years, he felt at peace. "Dad," Sarah said, curled up next to him on the couch, "what happens now?" Thomas scratched Rex behind the ears, the dog that had started it all, by digging up a rusty helmet in the backyard. "Now we let the truth do what truth does best, sweetheart. We let it shine a light on the darkness." On the television, a news anchor was reading from Lieutenant Harrison's letter. The words that had been hidden for 78 years, finally reaching the audience they were meant for, the American people. "Oh dear, if you're reading this, then I didn't make it home. But maybe, somehow, the truth did. Thomas Mitchell, a 72-year-old Marine veteran with arthritis and a loyal dog, had completed a mission that began on the beaches of Normandy. The men who had died in those secret experiments would finally have justice, and the conspiracy that had protected their killers was finally exposed. The truth had come home at last. And there you have it, the incredible true story of how one veteran's dog uncovered a conspiracy that had been hidden for nearly 8 decades. Thomas Mitchell's courage to stand up against impossible odds. The loyalty of friends like Professor Williams and Colonel Patterson, and the determination to honor the sacrifice of forgotten heroes shows us that the truth, no matter how long buried, will eventually find its way to the light. If this story moved you as much as it moved us, please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss these incredible tales of courage and justice. Drop a comment below telling us what you thought about Thomas's decision to risk everything for the truth. Would you have done the same? And don't forget to smash that like button to help us reach more people who need to hear these important stories. Your support helps us continue bringing you the most compelling true stories from around the world. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next incredible story.